Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahans Parikrakacharya Ashotra Sata Srimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahans Parikrakacharya Ashotra Sata Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananda Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Shri Hardas Thakur Ki Jai ISKCON founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadar Shri Vasadi Gauda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopi Gopa Gopinath Shyam Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Madhava Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Shri Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai Ganga Mai Ki Jai Yamuna Mai Ki Jai Tulsi Devi Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai Brihad Mridanga Ki Jai, Samaved Bhakti Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. Gaura Premananda Hari Hari Bol. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Sari Krishna, dear devotees, thank you for joining, and thanks to Karuna Chaitanya Prabhu, for inviting me to give this class. I'm in no way really qualified to do something like this. I'm still, learning lots, but this sort of opportunity just gives me the chance to really, read more and and just share some insight. But I will, speak on the strength of Srila Prabhupada and his various commentaries, and also make reference to other texts which I thought were relevant to these verses that I'm going to speak about. So yeah, please bless me that I can share something that is relevant and useful to you. There are some senior devotees, so yeah, do let me know if I have missed anything or misrepresent anything. When you look at the Bhagavatam, it's really useful to remind ourselves what the Bhagavatam is in the context of overall Vedic scriptures. When you look at Sanatana Dharma, there are 6 schools of Vedic philosophy which all give 6 different views about the source of creation, and they are called the 6 darshanas of Sanatana Dharma. And some of them are atheistic, some of them are based on logic and science, One of them is based on yoga. And so all of the sages that developed all of these philosophies were actually disciples of Vyasadeva, or they were his, contemporaries. But Vyasadeva, after studying all of the darshanas, he presented something called Vedanta, which is the conclusion of all the Vedas. But even after presenting Vedanta, he still wasn't satisfied. And so therefore he compiled the Bhagavatam as his final masterpiece, which is like the culmination of, all of his previous treatises. And in his masterpiece, he describes Vasudev, Krishna, as the ultimate cause of all causes and the ultimate object of all spiritual practice. And so in the verses that I'm going to share with you, and I'm going to be speaking about, Yudhishthira Maharaj himself exemplifies how he was freed from all material ambition, and that service to Krishna was his only goal in life. And so we are generally very fortunate to have Srimad Bhagavatam, or access to the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the essence of Vedanta knowledge, and because it harmonizes all the previous other schools. And so gratitude to Srila Prabhupada. So I'm just going to say some prayers before I go into the verses, or actually I'm going to read the verses first. So 112.4, I don't know if that's going to be on the screen, but I am just going to read the verses. Shruta uvacha abhipala dharmaraja vidrava ranjayan praja nisapra sarvakamebhya Vishna padanu sevaya. Sutta Uvacha, Sri Sutta Goswami said, Abhipalad administered prosperity. Dharmaraj, King Yudhishthira, Pitravat, exactly like his father. Ranjayam, pleasing. Praja, all those who took birth. Nisprita Sriha, without personal ambition. Sarva, all. Gamebhya, from sense gratification. Krishna Pada, the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. Anusevaya, by dint of rendering continuous service. And the translation. Sri Shuta Goswami said, Emperor Yudhishthira administered generously to everyone during his reign. He was exactly like his father. He had no personal ambition and was freed from all sorts of sense gratification because of his continuous service unto the lotus feet of the Lord Sri Krishna. And the purport by Bhakti Vedanta Srila Swami Prabhupada. As mentioned in our introduction, there is a need for the science of Krishna in human society for all the suffering humanity of the world. And we simply request the leading personalities of all nations to take to the science of Krishna for their own good, for the good of society and for the good of all the people of the world. So it is confirmed herein by the example of Maharaj Yudhishthira, the personality of goodness. In India, the people hanker after Rama Rajya because the personality of Godhead was the ideal king, and all of the kings or emperors in India controlled the destiny of the world for the prosperity of every living being who took birth on the earth. Herein the word praja is significant. The etymological import of the word is that which is born. On the earth, there are many species of life, from the aquatics up to the perfect human beings, and all are known as prajas. Lord Brahma, the creator of this particular universe, is known as a Prajapati because he is the grandfather of all who have taken birth. Thus, praja is used in a broader sense than it is now used. The king represents all living entities, the aquatics, plants, trees, reptiles, birds, animals, and man. Every one of them is a part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, Bhagavad Gita 14.4. And the king, being a representative of the Supreme Lord, is duty-bound to give proper protection to every one of them. This is not the case for the presidents and dictators of this demoralized system of administration, where the lower animals are given no protection, where the higher animals are given so-called protection. But this is a great science which can be learned only by one who knows the science of Krishna. By knowing the science of Krishna, one can become the most perfect man in the world, and unless one has knowledge in this science, all qualifications and doctorate diplomas acquired by academic education are spoiled and useless. Maharaj Yudhishthira knew the science of Krishna very well, for it is stated here that by continuous cultivation of this science, or by continuous devotional service to Lord Krishna, he acquired the qualification of administering the state. The father is sometimes seemingly cruel to the son, but this does not mean that the father has lost the qualification to be a father. A father is always a father because he always has the good of the son at heart. The father wants every one of his sons to become a better man than himself. Therefore, a king like Maharaj Yudhishthira, who was a personality of goodness, wanted everyone under his administration, especially human beings who have better developed consciousness, to become devotees of Lord Krishna, so that everyone can become free from the trifles of material existence. His motto of administration was all good for the citizens, for as personified goodness, he knew perfectly well what is actually good for them. He conducted the administration on that principle and not on the Rakshashi, demonic principle of sense gratification. As an ideal king, he had no personal ambition, and there was no place for sense gratification, because all his senses at all times were engaged in the loving service of the Supreme Lord, which includes the partial service to the living beings, who form the parts and parcels of a complete whole. Those who are busy rendering service to the parts and parcels, leaving aside the complete whole, only spoil time and energy, as one does when watering the leaves of a tree without watering the root. If water is poured on the root, the leaves are enlivened perfectly and automatically. But if water is poured on the leaves only, the whole energy is spoiled. Maharaj Yudhishthira therefore was constantly engaged in the service of the Lord. And thus the parts and parcels of the Lord, the living beings under his careful administration, were perfectly attended with all comforts in his life and all progress in the next. That is the way of perfect management of state administration. Next verse, 112.5. Sampado kritavo loka mahishi brataropahi Jambudvit patyam yashashchatridifam katam. Sampada, opulence. Kratava, sacrifices. Loga, future administration. Mahishi, the queens. Bratara, the brothers. Mahi, the earth. Jambudvip, the globe or planet of our residence. Adipatyam, sovereignty. Cha, also. Yasha, fame. Cha, and Dridivam, celestial planets. Gatam, spread over. And the translation. News even reached the celestial planets about Maharaj Yudhishthira's worldly possessions, the sacrifices by which he would attain a better destination, his queen, his stalwart brothers, his extensive land, his sovereignty of the planet Earth, his fame, etc. And the purport by Prabhupada. Only a rich and great man's name and fame are known all over the world, and the name and fame of Maharaj Yudhishthira reached the higher planets because of his good administration, worldly possessions, glorious wife Draupadi, the strength of his brothers Bhima and Arjun, and his solid sovereign power over the world, known as Jambudvip. Here the word Loka is significant. There are different lokas or higher planets scattered all over the sky, both material and spiritual. A person can reach them by dint of his work in the present life, as stated in Bhagavad Gita 9.25. No forceful entrance is allowed there. The tiny material scientists and engineers who have discovered vehicles to travel over a few thousand miles in outer space will not be allowed entrance. That is not the way to reach the better planets. One must qualify himself to enter into such happy planets by sacrifice and service. Those who are sinful in every step of their life can expect only to be degraded into animal life, to suffer more and more the pangs of material existence. And this is also stated in Bhagavad Gita 16:19. Maharaj Yudhishthira's good sacrifices and qualifications were so lofty and virtuous that even the residents of the higher celestial planets were already prepared to receive him as one of them. And the third and final verse, 112:6. Kim te kama sura sparha mukunda manosudvija adija harur mudum rajnya shuditasya yatetara. Kim, what for? Te, all those. Kama, objects of sense enjoyment. Sura, of the denizens of heaven. Sparaha, aspirations. Mukunda manasaha, of one who is already God conscious. Dvija, O Brahmanas. Adijaru, could satisfy. Mudam, pleasure. Lajnya, of the king. Shuddhidasya, of the hungry. Yatha, as it is. Itare, in other things. And the translation, O Brahmanas, the opulence of the king was so enchanting that the denizens of heaven aspired for it. But because he was absorbed in the service of the Lord, nothing could satisfy him except the Lord's service. The purport by Srila Prabhupada. There are two things in the world which can satisfy living beings. When one is materially engrossed, he is satisfied only by sense gratification. But when one is liberated from the conditions of the material modes, he is satisfied only by rendering loving service for the satisfaction of the Lord. This means that the living being is constitutionally a servitor and not one who is served. Being illusioned by the conditions of the external energy, one falsely thinks himself to be the served, but actually he is not served. He is servant of the senses, like lust, desire, anger, avarice, pride, madness, and intolerance. When one is in his proper senses by attainment of spiritual knowledge, he realizes that he is not the master of the material world, but is only a servant of the senses. At that time, he begs for the service of the Lord and thus becomes happy without being illusioned by so-called material happiness. Maharaj Yudhishthira was one of the liberated souls, and therefore for him, there was no pleasure in a vast kingdom, good wife, obedient brothers, happy subjects, and prosperous world. These blessings automatically follows for a pure devotee, even though the devotee does not aspire for them. The example set herein is exactly suitable. It is said that one who is hungry is never satisfied by anything other than food. Really wonderful and inspiring here. I am just going to say the prayers and then I will just speak about the verses. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Gyanti Marandasya Gyananjana Shlakya Chakshunum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruvay Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uttapada Kamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vidamscha. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvashesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Shatarine Vanchakalpa Durubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Vacha Patitanam Pavinabhyo Vaishnavbhyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Parayate Krishna Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tushe Namaha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Ganta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sutidevi Pranamami Hari Priye. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Nama Hare Nama Iva Kevalam Kalonasti Evanasti Evagatiran Yata. Now, thank you all for joining. I just want to see just who's around. Wonderful. Thank you for the opportunity once again. When I was going through these verses and the purport, I realized that these verses and the purports are so packed with insights that I really struggle to figure out what to actually talk about, because everything that needs to be said is already there. But however, I'm just going to try to see what additional insights I can provide, and kind of draw from other sources which are also relevant to these verses that I thought. Now, these verses give, I think I kind of like saw two aspects or two major topics. One is how a ruler should rule in society. So, i.e., it speaks about Varnashram Dharma, or the Varnashram system, from the context of leadership in society. And then the second topic I thought that I'm going to speak about is how one should also follow their Dharma with a sense of detachment and devotion. Now, so the first one is how a ruler should rule in society. Now, in these verses and in the purport, we see that Maharaj Yudhishthira sets a very wonderful example of the ideal king, and his kingdom apparently really flourished, both materially and spiritually, to the point that the devas were really impressed with him. And why is that? And the simple answer to that is that Maharaj Yudhishthira actually ruled in accordance with the principles of Varnashram Dharma. You may remember in Canto 1, Bhishma Dev himself, when he was doing the Bhishma Stuti, he gave guidance to Maharaj Yudhishthira. And even in Canto 7, Maharaj Yudhishthira gets a lot of counseling from Narad Muni. So he had, received a lot of counseling and coaching from both Bhishma Dev and Narad Muni, who were both Mahajanas. And so he learned about Varnashram Dharma and how to rule as a king. So it's not surprising that Yudhishthira Maharaj knew exactly what he was doing. So he was a most excellent leader following Rama Rajya. And so he was like a father to all living beings, as we see. So he was a representative of the Lord. And so he was simply serving in pursuance of serving Krishna, really. Now, this is a very, big contrast. I'm just going to really show a major contrast of how rulership works today. So in this day and age, we have something called democracy, as we know, or so-called democracy. And the Bhagavatam actually describes the democratic system of ruling as a popularity contest, really. And Canto 12 of the Bhagavatam describes democracy as where one, where you have a leader who's most boisterous and most audacious and loud. They seem to get the vote. So whoever has the most expensive marketing campaign and the best marketing campaign on social media, and who's quite boisterous, becomes a leader in society. So not a lot to do with their spiritual qualification, but it's whoever speaks the loudest. This is what we see, especially in the Western world. So this is what democracy really means. Now, when you look at the past few hundred years, we've had two main systems of sociological ruling. Two main social models, and they are communism and capitalism. So they have been the predominant social models that govern society. Now, if you look at communism, which are existent in countries like Russia and China, in a communist state, the state actually owns everything, i.e. the government owns everything. And then in a communist rule, what happens is that this kind of rule actually imposes artificial equality on everyone, and it rewards everybody equally. But then what that means is that those that are talented, like doctors, or those who are very intelligent, they become demotivated because they are not rewarded sufficiently, because everybody is just rewarded in the same way. So what communism does is that it actually ignores the diversity of the population. And then what happens is that in a communist state, you have a dictatorship and you have abuse at government level. And this is what you have seen in like countries like Russia and Korea as well. And so the people, the Praja, becomes really suppressed. So that doesn't seem to work either, as history has shown. And then on the other hand, the other extreme is capitalism, which we have in the US and the UK as well. Where this is in capitalism, in a capitalist society, you have individuals and companies where they actually own everything instead of the government. So you have privatization. Now, in capitalism, capitalism actually accepts diversity, but only at a very superficial level. And because of that, this system ultimately favors the rich. And because of that, capitalism actually creates social inequality. And so what happens is that you have a lot of cutthroat competition amongst amongst people and also amongst companies. And then what happens is that the wealthy exploit the poor people and the needy. And in capitalism, it's wealth alone that determines power, status, and position in society. And capitalism ultimately drives a very materialistic culture, as we see in the Western world. So even that doesn't work. Now, the Varnashram system, on the other hand, is completely different to these two. So under communism, the state owns everything. Capitalism, companies and private individuals own everything. But under the Varnashram system, who do you think owns everything? The answer to that is that the Lord is accepted as the ultimate proprietor of everything. The Ishopanishad says, Ishavasya midam sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagat, meaning that the Supreme Lord is the ultimate proprietor of everything. And this is the mood in which Maharaj Yudhishthira himself was ruling. Maharaj Yudhishthira did not see himself as the owner of everything. He did not see himself as a statesman who owns everything, nor did he give ownership to the Vaishyas, but he saw the Lord himself as the owner of everything. So this is Varnashram system of ruling. The other aspect of Varnashram system is that there is also equality. So you've got equality as well as diversity. So under this system of rule, this system actually embraces diversity as per people's individual nature, as per their guna and karma, so that people can flourish in whatever material work that they do. It recognizes everybody's different capacity, different, mental state. But at the same time, it also accepts the spiritual equality of absolutely everyone. So therefore, it accepts diversity on the material, mental level, and equality on the spiritual level. And this is how Maharaj Yudhishthira was ruling. So in terms of the impact on society, Varnashram system actually leads to a society which actually flourishes. But on the other hand, in contrast, communism leads to a demotivated praja, abuse at the top, and then capitalism leads to social inequality and materialism. So, Varnashram system, it actually integrates absolute spiritual equality and their relative material diversity. So in this system of ruling, which Maharaj Yudhishthira was following, everyone would work diligently in their various work and would be happy, and everyone would live cooperatively and accept the Lord as the ultimate proprietor. And because Maharaj Yudhishthira was ruling according to Varnashram Dharma, he actually avoided all the problems of capitalism and communism that we face in the world today, in this day and age. And so, when you look at, where we are today, as the purport says, and, indicates, the entire world is suffering because of spiritual hunger. Every living being is actually a spirit soul that is part and parcel of Krishna, and ultimately needs spiritual nourishment to be satisfied. And Varnashram Dharma is the only way to help actually attain this. But we don't have that in this day and age. So spiritual knowledge is absolutely essential for the executive heads of the governments. As the Bhagavad Gita says, Imam Rajasya Vidu, meaning how this knowledge was in ancient times passed down to the kings, but we don't have that. But unfortunately, in this day and age, the governmental power has been captured by Vaishyas, by business-like people, economists, by materialists, who actually have no spiritual understanding. And so therefore that is the reason why society becomes degraded and becomes materialistic, and suffers anxiety. And so the thing is that spiritual knowledge is supposed to be known by the government heads of society, because otherwise how will people be happy and gain relief from material suffering? Now, if you look at the various countries of the world today, especially the Western world, you'll find that the various states of the world are often just preoccupied with arranging military strength, like China and US does. And these countries also just pursue economic growth alone. So these countries spend huge amounts of their tax money in this way, but spiritual upliftment is not even part of their policy at all. And so therefore that's why we are where we are in the world today. But on the other hand, Maharaj Yudhishthira was a ruler who actually looked after his praja in all aspects. He fostered a spiritual culture and set a very, very high standard, an example, a really great example to others. And this is why Sutta Goswami here in these verses begins with glorifying Maharaj Yudhishthira as the grandfather of Parikshit. And so he himself takes Maharaj Yudhishthira as an inspiration before speaking more. So, this is Maharaj Yudhishthira. Now, there are also other wonderful examples that I wanted to share with you about this very topic. There's many other kings as well, in the Vedas. And one of my favorites that I tend to draw upon is the Valmiki Ramayana. And when it comes to the Ramayana, it is mainly Lord Ram that is described as the ideal king. But even before Lord Ram, you've actually got King Dasharath as well. And I just wanted to share some learnings with you from him as well. So even, long before Lord Ram himself was actually born and crowned Prince Regent, Valmiki describes how extraordinary Dasharath was in Balakan section of the Valmiki Ramayana. And so, King Dasharath, Maharaj Dasharath is also praised for properly maintaining his kingdom and praja by virtue of his righteousness and his benevolent rule. And so, Ayodhya was actually described as a city that was populated by Brahmanas. So, in the Balkan section of Valmiki Ramayana, Ayodhya is actually wonderfully described, and it describes the prosperity of its inhabitants during the reign of Maharaj Dasharath. And it says that Maharaj Dasharath actually also protected his subjects, and he himself was versed in the Vedas. He's actually described as a royal sage, almost as good as a Maharishi. And, Dasharath also performed yajnas. He himself had conquered his own senses. The citizens were very pious. They, smeared chandan over their bodies. It was a real Brahmanical culture. He encouraged charity as well. the people were really beautiful as well, apparently, because they had so much good karma over many generations. And so, the Varnashram system was followed in the Treta Yuga as well. And the Kshatriyas followed the lead of the Brahmanas. And so, in Ayodhya, it wasn't only Dashrath that was really pious, but even the ministers themselves were really virtuous as well. So during the reign of Dashrath, the ministers themselves are described as having controlled their senses, and knowing the Vedas as well. And it's said that these ministers, they also meted out punishment on their own sons if they actually transgressed the laws of the land, and if the situations demanded that. You will not find, this sort of behavior in this day and age. And at the same time, the ministers would not persecute their enemy if he wasn't found guilty. So, in these times, nobody told a lie. There was no wicked person. No one would have an affair with somebody else's wife, etc. And so, therefore, Yudhishthira basically had the same sort of kingdom and had the same sort of rulership. And so, what these examples show is that the king is supposed to be a representative of the Supreme Lord, and is actually duty bound to give proper protection to actually everyone and not to just the people. Today, you find that the rulers try to give superficial protection, but only with respect to economic welfare and a bit of health But when it comes to animals, that's not really much of a consideration. Now, it's quite interesting because the Vedas reveal that a king or a ruler of a country actually receives 1/6 of the total karma or karmic reactions of the subjects that he rules. So what this means is that if the prajas are pious and do spiritual deeds like they did in ancient times, the kings would actually share that merit, that punya. But if the praja are degraded, and if the king fails to stop them from being degraded, then the king would receive 1/6 of the total karmic reactions of his praja. And I think that's quite scary, because if we look at the kings, the rulers, presidents, and prime ministers in this day and age, if they don't look after their praja, and if they don't stop their citizens from being degraded, then these rulers will carry hairy karma. And, it's not a good place to be, really, given that these are the rules of karma. So therefore, as part of all of this, the king is also supposed to be protecting the animals as well. And at the moment, you have like superficial levels of protection. You've got things like the RSPCA, but even they protect, they do it on a discriminating way. They would protect like cats and dogs and pets, but not other animals like cows, for example. So there is, even the sort of animal protection that you find in this day and age, it is very, very superficial. You sometimes find advertisements about adopting a koala bear or providing protection to a tiger. But on the other hand, you'll have like mass industrialized animal slaughter against certain animals. So in this day and age, what you have today is just pure discrimination. On one hand, the king is supposed to be protecting all animals, but today you've got discrimination. And so some animals are given the designation of being a pet, but then on the other hand, you have other animals just being labeled as food. But in ancient Vedic culture, as described in scriptures like the Manu Smriti, eating animal was actually a concession, and there were very strict rules around eating animals. So, for example, if one was to eat animals, one would need to perform yagyas, and not just doing it willy-nilly. And so one would need to invite the brahmanas and perform certain yagyas, and the brahmanas were really properly qualified and able to pronounce these mantras properly. But in this day and age, that doesn't seem to be the case. There was a proper ritual behind that, certain conditions. But in this day and age, that is no longer followed. And so because the procurement of animals is not done in this way, there is a real karmic consequence. And in the Mahabharata itself, there, when Bhishma Dev was actually lying on his deathbed, when you've got the Bhishma Stuti, there's a conversation between Yudhishthira and Bhishma Dev. So this isn't revealed in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it's actually revealed in the Anususan Bharava section of the Mahabharata. And Yudhishthira at one point during this conversation asks Bhishma Dev about, protecting animals and eating animals. And Bhishma Dev actually, gives a very profound answer to this. And he basically says that, Yudhishthira, I will share with you what I've heard from the ancient sages. And so Bhishma Dev actually describes, the consumption of animals and the karmic consequence. And Bhishma Dev basically says that, there are 5 types of people that would, that can actually experience karmic reaction when it comes to meat eating or procuring animals for food. The first one is that one who directly slaughters the animal for food, they get tangled up in a web of karma. The second type of person is one who gives permission to slaughter the animal for food. So, i.e., this could be the farmer. So that's the second person. The third person is one who purchases the meat as well, because that means that they are supporting the cause of animal slaughter with the wealth. So what that means is that even if you don't eat meat yourself, but if you buy meat for somebody else, according to Manusmriti and according to Bhishma Dev and according to Mahabharata, you also get implicated in karma. And then the fourth person who becomes implicated in karma is one who cooks the meat for himself, or for others, they get implicated as well. And the fifth person is the one who eats the meat himself, because they are supporting the cause of animal slaughter with their tongue. So therefore, these are the 5 types of people that Bhishma Dev describes in the Mahabharata. Manusmriti says the same as well. So taking a step back, as per the purport, the king is supposed to protect the Braja, including the animals as well. He's not supposed to promote industrialized animal slaughter in the name of agriculture. And so Yudhishthira Maharaj was himself very careful, and as were other ancient kings. But today, we have industrialized slaughterhouses supported by the leaders of society. And because of, accruing negative karmic reactions, what we find happening is that, the land starts to becoming infertile. More of the land in the Western world is being used for producing feed for animal slaughter. And it's done using, artificial methods. And so as a result, you have the land becoming infertile because of the use of chemicals and, pesticides. You have like global warming. The weather becomes adverse to the point that Bhumi no longer produces nutritious food because the weather is not so good anymore. And so therefore, when you look at the statistics today, the UK, believe it or not, is actually a net importer of food. 80% of our food in the UK actually is imported. So even things like carrots that you have is actually comes from abroad. The sabji that we eat comes from abroad because, the heavy karma that, countries like the US and the UK are actually, accruing. And even the US is about to become a net importer as well of food. And on the other hand, you have like South America, for example. It's actually a net exporter of food, but they export meat to every other country in the world. But if you look at its own land, it's completely barren. It doesn't really grow much vegetation for its own use. So therefore, this is the state of the world today. Quite scary, really. And so in ancient Vedic culture, the king actually used to look after the animals as if they were his children. And so, doesn't really, now when you look at the lands today in many parts of the world, the US, if you look at Canada, if you look at the UK, we are almost becoming net importers of food from other countries, because our land is not growing much veg for our own use. So in ancient Vedic culture, the king used to look after the animals, look after the human beings with that spiritual culture, and also respected Bhumi Devi as well, respected Mother Earth. And the king used to perform yajna and encourage the praja to become, engaged in this yajna. But we don't have that happening today in this day and age. And so because of all of these reasons, the weather was really wonderful. It wasn't too hot, it wasn't too cold. There were no hurricanes to, ruin the lands, as it happens in this day and age. And so the earth provided lots of vegetation, and hence society really flourished. So therefore, human beings actually have a symbiotic relationship with Mother Earth, and our treatment of animals, etc. It's all intertwined from a karmic perspective. And therefore, it is really the Varnashram system that addresses all of these problems. And, Varnashram system, it can be, the thing is that the big takeaway is that this Varnashram system can only be successfully implemented only if the ruler himself is spiritually enlightened. It cannot happen actually otherwise. It can only work if the brahmanas are qualified to guide the rest of society, and if the kshatriyas are competent themselves, to manage, without oppressing the lower class, which doesn't really happen. The rulers of today can sometimes exploit the lower class, and they are there only for their own sort of status and wealth. But Yudhishthira, Maharaj Yudhishthira's system of ruling was based on the cultivation of the mode of goodness. He himself was on the platform of, sattva guna. And so therefore he sustained these things by qualities like compassion, integrity, etc. And so, this system can only work if the majority of the population is guided properly, to cultivate such qualities. And this is the reason why Maharaj Yudhishthira himself is glorified here in the Bhagavatam. Really, really wonderful. I think all rulers in society can learn a lot, from Maharaj Yudhishthira and other kings as well. So this is from the perspective of rulership. Now, these verses also talk about following our own dharma, and I think there's a lot we ourselves can learn as well. So Maharaj Yudhishthira serves as a great inspiration on how to follow, one's own dharma with a sense of detachment. And I'm sure you will all agree that, whilst we are in our day-to-day lives as working people, as grihastas, or as just following our material duties, it's sometimes very hard to do these things with a sense of detachment. So, what can we learn from Yudhishthira, and how can we imbibe these qualities for ourselves? So, as sovereign ruler of the world, Yudhishthira followed his kingly duties as a service to the Lord, but without any taste for sense gratification. The thing is that he had all the world, he had all the wealth in the world, but he had no material desire for himself, because nothing could satisfy him except for the Lord's service. If we find ourselves, quite well off, we often find ourselves attached to what we have, but Yudhishthira wasn't like that. This reminds me of a song by Bob Dylan, actually. Bob Dylan was a singer back in the 1970s, a rock singer. and he has a song which is called Gotta Serve Somebody. And the lyrics basically says something like, but you're going to serve, you're going to have to serve somebody. Yes, indeed, you're going to have to serve somebody. Well, it may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. And so, quite profound, really, and very relevant, because the question is, who do you want to serve? Do you want to serve the devil or do you want to serve the Lord? Because in any case, you've got these two choices, really. You're going to have to serve somebody. And Bob Dylan himself said this. And so this is very, very true. But the thing is that it's quite hard to follow this high standard of, it's a very high standard to aspire for, but it's still a great one to aspire for as well, to try and serve and work in a mode of detachment. And we can try to follow the footsteps of many other examples as well. And another example that I often try to turn to for inspiration is King Bharat from the Ramayana as well. When Lord Ram ended up in the forest, he asked Bharat to rule. And when Bharat was ruling as king of Ayodhya, what he did was he did not stay in the forest, but he stayed a few miles away from the palace, and he basically lived as a renunciate. He actually had matted hair, and he wore clothes just like a renunciate. And he ate he just ate roots. And when he was ruling, he accepted none of the privileges of, the kingdom, and he took on all the responsibilities of the king. And, when the Praja were giving, gifts to the king, he actually saved it for Ram. He said, this does not actually belong to me. I am going to save this for Ram when he returns. And whenever he had, problems, to do with, ruling, he actually presented his problem, to Ram as well. He offered his problem, meditated on him, and then he made any decisions. So when you look at Bharat, he accepted none of the privileges of all the wealth that he had. So I kind of, I usually turn to that. Often turn to Bharat as another source of inspiration. And so, when you look at ourselves, when we ourselves engaged in our field of business or some sort of career, it's very easy to be motivated by the financial reward and the status that comes along with it for the sole purpose of our materialistic enjoyment. And so what happens is that, one labors away hard so that they can put a roof over their head and enjoy sense gratification with the hard-earned money. So this is usually the default state of current civilization. You find that everybody is just hungry for material, success. But what happens is that we fail to realize that such happiness is only a concoction of Maya, because material happiness doesn't last for long. We all forget this. And not only us, but even the demigods forget this as well. Even the devas themselves forget their own spiritual identity. And even the devas themselves become materialistic sometimes. So, what to speak of us. And, there's a wonderful pastime that I reflect on sometimes from the Gena Upanishad. There's a pastime where the devas, the demigods, they defeated the asuras, and they become puffed up in their pride, thinking that, look at us, we are so great, we have all of these powers, we have so much Shakti, and because of our Shakti, we defeated the demons. And because they became puffed up, the Supreme Lord decided to appear in front of the demigods, and he appeared in the form of a yaksha to test them. He got Agnidev to, burn this leaf, because Agnidev said that I have so much power, I can burn away this entire universe. And when the yaksha said, burn this leaf, the Agnidev failed. And then Varundev, he himself told the yaksha that I have so much power that I can blow away the universe. Yaksha said, okay, blow away this leaf, and he couldn't. And so in this process, in this test, the devas realized that they have got no power at all without the sanctioning power of the Supreme Lord within them. And so this Upanishad gives us a reminder that any success that we have, any power that we have, any talent that we have, is entirely because of the Supreme Lord. He is the power behind our thinking ability, the power behind our ability to remember, the ability to cook, the ability to earn money or anything. And so therefore, we should ourselves meditate on these, factual things and not become puffed up in these things. And so, the scriptures gives an example of how the devas sometimes become so attached to their powers and status and position that they forget that, they are the non-doers. So we need, so what to speak of us? But, the big question is, how do we remind ourselves, to stay detached and that we are the non-doer? How do we follow the footsteps in Maharaj Yudhishthira? It's easier said than done, at least for me anyway. And so, the Srimad Bhagavatam has some very inspiring advice on detachment. And, there's some examples I want to share with you that I follow and I remind myself as well. Now, in Canto 11, there's a conversation between, in the conversation between Uddhav and Krishna, he cites this conversation about Yadu Maharaj and the Avadut Brahmana. And the Avadut Brahmana describes lessons that he himself learned from 25 spiritual masters. And I'm just going to give you a handful of them. So this Avadut Brahmana gives the example of a python and how the python just stays still in the grass, and the python, you will never find the python just chasing for anything. And only when the prey comes to him, only then he will actually just have his prey. And so the lesson to be learned from the python is that we shouldn't over endeavor, and that we should just patiently wait for whatever the Lord gives to you. And, and just don't become agitated. And so that's the lesson to learn from the python. And then the other lesson from the Avadut Brahmana is, try to be like the ocean. The ocean is grave, it's unlimited. And what you will find is that when rivers flow into the ocean, you will never find the ocean become full. And similarly, when the rivers dry up, you will never find that the ocean becomes dried up. The ocean remains equipoised and still. And so therefore, we should try to be undisturbed and undetached like the ocean as well. And then you got, the wind as well. When you look at the wind as well, the wind blows, everywhere, but you never find that the wind becomes entangled in anything. So therefore, we should also remain, we shouldn't become detached, we shouldn't become attached when we come into contact with sense objects. And similarly with the sky as well, if you look at the sky, you'll find that the winds blow, you've got storms happening, but the sky never ever becomes implicated in what's going on around the world and what's going on in the environment. So therefore, we should actually, remain detached as well. And lastly, when you look at the moon has many, many phases, from the waxing to the waning, from the waning. But the fact is that the moon undergoes no change at all. So similarly, when we go through many phases in life, through the ups and downs, we should try to stay detached, because as the Atma, there are no such phases. So therefore, these are just some examples that you can, meditate on or reflect on, these analogies. So what does all of this mean to us? The ancient Vedic system that came from the supreme, person, Krishna, which is the Varnashram Dharma, as exemplified by Maharaj Yudhishthira following it, is what, helped uplift society in ancient times. Yudhishthira Maharaj was the perfect ruler, just like Dashrath, just like Lord Ram, just like, King Bharat and many, many others. And the roles of the Brahmanas and the Kshatriyas were very clearly described based on, these supreme qualities. And so now in this day and age, the more we deviate away from that and just decide to act according to our own whims, then what happens is that society just struggles for existence. And, we struggle with inner peace. So, on one hand, we've advanced technologically and in terms of medicine, but society has become, more and more distressed. And so today, in this day and age, our leaders are not spiritually qualified to rule countries, and this is why society crumbles when we have no spiritual direction at the top. So there's no, we don't have the benefit of Rama Rajya in this day and age. So the thing is that although this kind of system doesn't exist at the sociological level, we can still follow these principles at the individual level. And what we need to do is just take inspiration from Maharaj Yudhishthira when it comes to our own work, career, family life. And what we need to do is just dedicate our work and to Krishna, where we can, and cultivate spiritual growth at the same time. So whether you're serving your husband or your wife or your children, do these things as a service to the Lord. Take inspiration from Bharat, who ruled, Ayodhya as a service to Sri Ram. And, try not to claim any proprietorship. Don't get puffed up in your abilities and realize that it's not me, it's the Lord. That's my own ability. So cultivate, detachment in all of your material endeavors. And, just look for the spiritual goal of pleasing Krishna. And, constantly ask yourself, is this going to please Krishna? Or am I going to betray him in what I am doing? And, is this the right response, to give in any given situation? In all of your interactions, when you're interacting with people, you sometimes clash with people. Ask yourself, what's the right response to give? Try to see with, with Jignasu, with spiritual, vision as well. And, your work and spiritual goals just need to go hand in hand, as indicated by these verses, to try to do your worldly duties as an offering to the Lord. And if you do that, you won't be subject to the laws of karma, and you will pave your way to the highest spiritual destination. This is where I'm going to be ending now. Apologies, I think I just went a few minutes overboard. But I welcome any thoughts. Please tell me if I've missed anything. Please share any thoughts you may have. Thank you, Manohar Prabhu, for your kind words. Any thoughts, reflections from anyone?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
I just had a small query about the last bit that you talked about, detachment in the work, and you gave the so yeah, what was clear was, yes, materialistic things do not last, and then try and detach yourself. Now, every act that you're doing, you said, was we need to wonder whether this is the act that will please Krishna. And that is how you can, that what you're doing is, probably you're on the right path. But how does that help in detachment? You could still be getting attached and doing these things.
Very wonderful question. Yeah. So, there's, when it comes to cultivating detachment, there's two approaches: the path of Gyan, and then there's path of Bhakti. If one follows the path of Gyan, then what one does is that one follows the path of Neti, which means that you basically negate everything that is material. So you say, this body is material and it's not real. All of these material activities are unreal, so therefore I'm not going to engage. But this is more to do with using your intellect, and that is very, very, very difficult. And in the Bhakti school, that is not the process recommended. But in Bhakti, attachment to Krishna automatically results in detachment. That's a short answer. And why is that? When we come to Krishna, you over time, when you practice sadhana bhakti, you come to this stage of bhava bhakti and then brahma bhakti, and you start to realize some higher level of bliss. And when you realize that bliss, then detachment becomes just an automatic outcome. You don't have to mentally say, oh, I must become detached, but you become blissed out in serving Krishna and the devotees to the point that, yeah, detachment just follows automatically. And I would say that, many devotees will actually vouch for this, and I would vouch for this myself as well. Over the years, yeah, I found that it's become easier for me to detach, because yeah, you start to see Krishna in everything. You start to see Krishna's hand in the workings of your life, and you start to worry less, and you see the bigger picture of, just thinking about the value of what is eternal and not worry about the trivial, non-permanent things that go on in your life.
Okay. So in short, if you're on the bhakti marg, this becomes automatically a second nature.
Yeah,
so we
100%.
don't have to, at this stage, we don't have to make any physical effort of trying, mental effort of trying to do this.
No. Yeah, the mental effort is for the jnani, is the path of jnana, the path of Adi Shankaracharya or Dvaita Vedanta. They have to do these things very, very hard. And that's why chapter 12 of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna asked the question, which yogi is better, the one who follows the impersonalist process or the one who meditates on me? And Krishna says the one who follows the impersonalist Gyan yoga, progress is very, very troublesome, because you have no object of meditation other than yourself. You are intellectually trying to reject things. It's very, very hard. You are trying to come to the platform of goodness through Gyan. But bhakti, it attracts divine grace. You can't, Krishna has said that to overcome the influences of the modes of nature, turn to me. And so therefore he helps us transcend all three modes of nature. And that's why detachment becomes easy under bhakti.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking a wonderful question.
Thank you.
Anything else from anyone? Or feel free to comment if I've missed anything else. Bhaktiman Prabhu, you're a very scholarly devotee. I may just call out some names if I may. Even Guru and Chaitanya Prabhu, you guys are wonderful.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Thank you for the wonderful class, and you brought up some wonderful points, and these points are very, very instructive reminders that this world is not our natural abode, and it is a place of suffering. Dukhalayam Shashvatam, as we know in Bhagavad Gita. And just adding to what you said about detachment, there's two principal points which really every aspiring devotee, anybody interested in bhakti should be ingrained into the very fabric of their life. The principal points being yukta vairagya and falgu vairagya. Yukta vairagya means real detachment. Falgu vairagya obviously means false detachment. Yukta vairagya means real detachment, and falgu vairagya means false detachment. And Srila Prabhupada really clears these points up in his lectures. So it's very, very important that we regularly listen to these lectures. And what you were speaking about in terms of those that are implicated in animal slaughter, just reflecting back on this idea of the four regulative principles. And there's 2 points about antiseptic and prophylactic. You may have heard. So if you can just comment on antiseptic and prophylactic. I was just looking at this idea of prophylactic meaning that you prevent a disease from happening in the first place, and antiseptic meaning that you put something, an ointment on your body of some sort to prevent the growth or to stop a disease continue. Yeah. So if you can just comment a bit about prophylactic and antiseptic, really.
Yeah. Actually, yeah. I mean, so prophylactic is using. Yamraj talks about this, and as does Bhaktivinoda Thakur as well. So all of the dharmas outside of our eternal Sanatan Dharma. So I'm going to say, the Nitya Dharma of the Atma is to render service unto Krishna. And so that is really the ultimate antiseptic. Now, in the Bhagavatam, Yamraj talks about, different ways of actually, overcoming, just doing prayashchit and overcoming mistakes that you've made. And those kind of things are, usually in the domain of karma kanda, which are also described as Naimatika Dharma by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So when one performs like religious rituals to just overcome material problems or to kind of like just elevate yourself superficially, the result is completely temporary. It's just like a prophylactic solution. It's just like a patch up, but you don't really solve anything, because by following the religious rituals of religion, you don't really change your consciousness from within. And this is what Yamraj reveals, I think, in Canto 4 or 5 of the Bhagavatam. And this is what Bhaktivinoda Thakur actually says in Jayavadharma as well. And so therefore, the ultimate antiseptic is, Harinam, Krishnanam. And by doing that, what happens is that one cleanses their consciousness from within. And our consciousness has been contaminated over many, many lives. We have so much attachment and aversions. And so therefore, we have so many impressions on our mind. When one goes from one body to another over many, many lives, we have many, many deep impressions. It's like holding on to a hot piece of coal for many, many lives. We've got so many impressions. Our mind, intelligence, ego comes with this. And by doing bhakti, these impressions start to go slowly start to go away, become purified. And so therefore, bhakti is really the ultimate antiseptic. And when one becomes completely purified, you start to clean away karma. You stop accruing new karma. And the Upanishads reveal that only when our karma is clean does one attain liberation, ultimately. And so therefore, what that means is that in our spiritual practices, we should, follow processes which serves as an antiseptic, like bhakti, rather than the karma kanda practices of religious rituals, which are just prophylactic. I hope that helps. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, wonderful points. Exactly. Like you said, antiseptic. It's about also like this cleansing of the heart to make a nice environment for Krishna, and also the idea that what you mentioned as well about Harinam Sankirtan being the process. So you got two things going on. You got a defense aspect, which is your four regulative principles, but that alone is not in itself exactly. So it's not in itself the end goal, or it's not the objective. But then you've got the positive, the if as it were, the advancement or the forward movement of bhakti, which is Harinam Sankirtan. So you got to have that, have different levels of balance within with yourself.
It's a multi-dimensional process. Yeah. And one way you go to test yourself is that if the Vedas, the Upanishads, and the Bhagavatam talks about different states of consciousness. So you've got something called the waking state, which is our everyday transaction. You've got the dream state, but the Vedas say that you are neither the person in the dream, nor are you the person in the waking state. there is one unchanging observer. So in your dreams, if you're forgetting who you really are, that means you're still haven't, mastered self-realization. And in this waking state, as we experience now, if you are forgetting that you are, nothing but the unch of the Lord and the servant of the Lord, then you've still not attained the right state of self-realization. So, the reality is that you are, an unchanging observer, dasan udasan udas. And try to see if you can remember this within your dreams, see if you can remember this in your waking state as well. This is what I've, read in the Upanishads, try to remember who you are whilst you're asleep, whilst you're awake. And if you can do that, then you're really progressing. And try to transcend all of these states. And this is where, meditating on Gopala helps, really, meditating on the Lord himself. This is what helps us, help us remember who we really are.
Yes, wonderful. And also, like you said about waking state, even in our waking state, we can actually be absent-minded. So
yeah, we forgetful. Yeah,
in our devotional practices. So there's a sliding scale of absent-minded to absolute absorption and consummation.
Yes, that's right.
Absolute consumed by it.
Yeah,
which is very, it's actually quite inconceivable to fathom. So we have to gauge how we are practicing, and build different layers of our practice, and really accept also that our situation, but also then understand how we can actually move towards this idea of Harinam or Sankirtan, and understanding the objectives of Krishna consciousness as well.
It's a multi-dimensional process. On one hand, you got the Vedas saying Sarvam Kalvidam Brahm, which means that the Supreme Being is everything. So therefore, in our day-to-day, if one sees everything, everything, there is nothing unrelated to Krishna. Your daily problems are not unrelated to Krishna. There is nothing that exists other than Krishna and his energies. If you look at the Rudra Sampradaya, they really emphasize this point that nothing exists other than Krishna and his Shaktis. We ourselves are the Shakti of Krishna, and everything, from this phone itself to everything is Krishna's energy. So therefore, if you try to see him in your work, in your service, in your day-to-day work, then it becomes easier to think of the Lord. You can turn your work and your day-to-day living into a daily meditative practice, in addition to following the sadhana bhakti practices such as Harinam, reading, etc. Just try to remember that nothing exists other than Krishna and his energies. When you're out in nature, try to see Krishna. When you experience problems, see Krishna's hands. He's giving the opportunity to purify yourself, giving you the opportunity to remove your karma. And so therefore, then it becomes easy to remember Krishna in every given state. That's, and that's where I try to remember, even in my day job, I try to see his hands. But yeah, I mean, I think I've rambled on enough, but I'm sure most people already know this.
Thank you, Prabhu. Wonderful point. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna all. If there's anything else, please feel free to shout so that we can call it a day and go back to our Sundays.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
I'll put a question on the chat for you, if you have time.
Sure. I mean, feel free to raise it just on here if you like.
I asked a question about your thoughts on our plastic consumption and the damage that we're doing to other living entities and the environment.
I mean, when you look at the industrial revolution, it's come up with solutions, but it's come up with many problems as well. So plastic consumption and the damage we are doing. Yeah, so therefore, yeah, I mean, we shouldn't really live our life in a way where we are destroying Mother Earth. I mean, when you look at the Vedas, the king is supposed to live in a symbiotic way with Mother Earth as well. That's the view from Shastra. And so therefore you have like factories which produce goods which are not really good for the environment. And so therefore that destroys the planet. And so therefore we accrue negative karma. So what should we do on a personal level? Then, one should try to minimize contributing to the harm of the environment, where possible. And also try to use their goods as a service to the Lord as well. So, you got your phone. Your phone can be used, your phone can either sometimes contaminate you on one hand, but on the other hand, if you use your phone and technology and plastic goods to serve the Lord, then that can actually minimize the karmic reaction at an individual level. But if we are using, industrialized products purely for the purpose of, for your material welfare, then we all end up in karmic entanglement. But if we try to avoid damage to the environment and instead try to use these products as in utilization of self-realization and God realization, then you won't become tangled up in a web of karma. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yes, thank you. So it's we have a personal, individual responsibility
to minimize damage. Yeah, try to minimize damage. Yeah, don't be part of the problem. Try to avoid being contributing towards a problem. And if you are having to utilize stuff, well, you try to utilize it as a service to Krishna to see if you can, see if you can use these things in service of Krishna, and that way, what you're doing becomes spiritualized, and therefore you won't accrue the negative karma.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you for asking a really wonderful question.
Thank you.
Thank you all for engaging and asking for really wonderful questions. And I hope to listen to others speak as well. And thank you to Karuna Chaitanya Prabhu for giving me this opportunity. Always grateful. I'll just hand over to Karuna Chaitanya if you're still around.
I think he's just dropped off.
Oh, okay. I think he's there, but if it's okay if he's gone. But thank you all. Thank you, Bhaktiman Prabhu, as well. And I hope you all have a good Sunday as well. Hope to see you soon.
Okay.
Thank you, Kiran Prabhu, for wonderful class. It was amazing to hear once again from you. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone as well for participating. We will meet next week with another wonderful devotee. This time, because it's going to be Radhastami, His Grace Karthik Chandra Prabhu will give class. I request all of you to join and relish the nectar of Srimad Bhagavatam. Hare Krishna. His Grace Kiran Prabhu ki jai.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for wonderful class, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. Really brilliant class. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.